10 years ago, my son looked me in the eye and said, "I don't have a poor father." That night, he erased me from his life. Last week, a cream-colored envelope arrived from Detroit. Inside was an invitation to his 40th birthday, held at a country club where a single table cost more than I earned in a month at the steel plant. He only remembered he had a father after I won $18.4 million. I arrived quietly, unannounced. The music stopped. Glasses paused mid-air. And when my son finally saw me, his smile froze, not with shame, but with expectation. He thought I had come to forgive him. He had no idea why I was really there. Before we continue, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is. And please, take a moment to care for your health, because time has a way of teaching us all. I stepped forward, holding the envelope in my hand. And that was the moment everything began to change. My name is Leonard Dawson. Most people call me Leo. I was born in Michigan, raised on American soil, and spent most of my working life just across the border in Ontario, Canada. For nearly 3 decades, I worked as a maintenance supervisor in a steel plant, 12-hour shifts, 6 days a week. The kind of job that leaves your hands rough, your back aching, and your pride quietly intact. It wasn't glamorous, but it was honest. I believed in simple things: work hard, provide for your family, keep your word, and for many years I did exactly that. Jason was my firstborn, a bright boy with sharp eyes and bigger dreams than I ever dared to have. I remember the day he graduated from college in Michigan. The sun was warm, the air smelled of fresh grass, and I stood there in my only suit, the same one I'd worn to our wedding. I was proud, prouder than words could ever express. Monica stood beside me, elegant and composed, her smile tight with expectations. Claire, our daughter, adjusted her camera, always careful, always observant. They belonged in that world of polished shoes and confident laughter. I did not. After the ceremony, Jason gathered with his friends, young men in tailored suits, speaking of investments, startups, and futures measured in millions. I waited at the edge of the crowd, holding a small gift box, a simple wristwatch I had saved months to buy. When Jason saw me approaching, his smile faded. "Dad," he said quietly, his voice edged with embarrassment, "you didn't have to come." I forced a smile. "I wouldn't miss this day for anything, son." He glanced at his friends. Then, in a tone meant to be light but sharp enough to cut, he said the words that would follow me for the next 10 years. "I don't have a poor father." Silence fell around us. No one laughed, no one spoke. Monica lowered her gaze, pretending not to hear. Claire turned away, adjusting her camera as if the moment did not exist. And I simply nodded, placed the watch back into my pocket, and walked away. I did not argue. I did not raise my voice. That was the last day my son spoke to me. The divorce papers arrived 6 months later, quiet, efficient, and final. Monica moved back to Detroit. Jason began building his career, surrounded by people who measured worth in numbers. Claire followed, working in media, shaping stories that were always more beautiful than the truth. And I returned to Ontario, to the steel plant, to the steady rhythm of machines and the comfort of silence. Years passed. Winters came and went. My hair turned gray, my hands grew slower, but my memory never faded. I lived alone in a modest house overlooking a frozen lake, watching the seasons change like pages in a book no one else cared to read. Then, one winter morning, everything changed. A small convenience store, a cup of burnt coffee, a lottery ticket bought on impulse. I remember the numbers clearly. I always will. Days later, when the clerk scanned the ticket, he looked up at me with trembling hands and whispered, "Sir, you might want to sit down." That was the moment my life shifted. But I didn't call my family, not Monica, not Claire, and certainly not Jason. Instead, I folded the ticket carefully, placed it inside my wallet, and stepped out into the cold Canadian air, alone, richer than I had ever imagined, and more forgotten than ever before. I had no idea then that my silence would one day bring my son back to me, with a smile that did not belong to a son, but to a man who had finally discovered how much his father was worth. And 10 years later, a cream-colored envelope would arrive in my mailbox, bearing his name. The winter I won the lottery was the coldest I could remember. Snow covered the lake behind my small house in Ontario, turning the world into a quiet sheet of white. The steel plant had already begun reducing shifts, and retirement was no longer a distant idea. It was an inevitability waiting at the end of a long corridor. That morning, I stopped at a convenience store on my way home. Burnt coffee, a stale muffin, and a lottery ticket I bought without thinking. I almost forgot about it. Days later, I returned to the same store. The clerk scanned the ticket, then froze. His hands trembled as he looked at the screen again. "Sir, you might want to sit down." I smiled politely. "Is it 500?" He swallowed. His voice dropped to a whisper. "No, sir. It's 18.4 million Canadian dollars." For a moment, I heard nothing. No traffic, no voices, just the quiet hum of the fluorescent lights above us. 18.4 million. I didn't celebrate. I didn't shout. I simply folded the ticket and placed it carefully into my wallet, as if it were made of glass. Outside, the cold air brushed against my face, sharp and clean. I stood there alone, richer than I had ever imagined, and with no one to tell. Not Monica, not Claire, and certainly not Jason. Instead, I called Arthur Bell, an old friend and a meticulous CPA in Detroit. We met a week later in his office. Mahogany shelves, warm lighting, and the faint scent of polished wood. Arthur adjusted his glasses as he reviewed the documents. "Leo," he said quietly, "this kind of money can change lives, or destroy them." "I'm not interested in either," I replied. "I just want it protected." Within months, most of the funds were placed into an irrevocable charitable trust in Canada, secure, untouchable, and invisible to those who might come looking. The remaining portion ensured I would live comfortably for the rest of my life. Nothing extravagant, just peace. Years passed in silence. Then one spring afternoon, curiosity led me to Detroit. I attended a charity event quietly, unnoticed among the crowd. A banner stretched across the entrance read, "Bright Steps Foundation, Empowering Children with Down Syndrome." The founder's name stopped me in my tracks. Jason Dawson. He stood on the stage in a tailored suit, confident and admired, speaking about compassion, responsibility, and hope. The audience applauded. Cameras flashed. He looked every inch the man he had always wanted to become. Then I saw the boy. 8 years old, soft brown hair, gentle eyes filled with wonder. He clutched a box of crayons and smiled at everyone who passed by. "Hello," he said to me, his voice warm and unguarded. "Do you like my drawing?" I knelt beside him. "I do. It's beautiful." "My name is Noah," he said proudly. "What's yours?" For a moment, I couldn't speak. "I'm Leo," I replied softly. He handed me the drawing, a simple picture of a house beneath a bright yellow sun, two stick figures standing side by side, one tall, one small. "Will you keep it?" he asked. I nodded, my throat tightening. "Yes, I will." As I stood there holding the drawing, Arthur's earlier warning echoed in my mind. Later that evening, I quietly requested copies of the Foundation's financial reports. What I found unsettled me. Unusual administrative expenses, inflated media contracts, and payments routed through companies tied to Claire and Monica. It wasn't proof, but it was enough to raise questions. And just as I began to wonder whether I should step back into their world, a cream-colored envelope arrived in my mailbox in Ontario. I recognized the handwriting immediately. Jason Dawson. Inside was an invitation embossed in gold. "You are cordially invited to celebrate my 40th birthday." I stared at the card for a long time, Noah's drawing resting beside it on my desk. After 10 years of silence, my son had finally remembered he had a father. But the question was no longer why he had invited me. It was what he wanted from me now. The night of Jason's birthday arrived with quiet precision, as if destiny itself had marked it on my calendar. Detroit greeted me with warmer air and the distant hum of traffic. The country club stood on the edge of the city like a monument to success. White columns, manicured lawns, and a line of black sedans gliding toward the entrance. Valets in crisp uniforms moved with silent efficiency beneath golden lights. I stepped out of my car slowly, adjusting the cuff of my jacket. Inside my leather case rested two things: Noah's drawing and the original lottery ticket, framed and preserved behind glass. One represented innocence, the other, consequence. As I approached the entrance, a young attendant opened the door with a polite smile. The sound of jazz drifted through the air, soft, elegant, and carefully curated. Crystal chandeliers shimmered above a ballroom filled with laughter, champagne, and polished ambition. Shebgan had spared no expense. A banner stretched across the stage, "Bright Steps Foundation, a future of hope." I paused at the threshold, unnoticed. Guests mingled beneath the glow of camera lights, their conversations woven with admiration and speculation. Media crews adjusted their lenses, capturing every moment of the celebration. It was not merely a birthday, it was a performance, and my son stood at its center. Jason Dawson looked confident in a tailored charcoal suit, his voice steady as he greeted donors and investors. His smile was flawless, warm, persuasive, rehearsed. Claire moved gracefully among the guests, directing the photographers with quiet authority. Monica welcomed attendees with the practiced charm of a woman who knew exactly where she belonged. They had built a world of elegance and influence, a world that had never needed me. Then Noah saw me. He stood near an easel displaying children's drawings, clutching a box of crayons. His eyes widened, and he ran toward me without hesitation. "Leo!" he exclaimed, his small hands wrapping around mine. "You came!" His voice carried across the room, gentle yet unmistakable. A few guests turned, then more followed. Jason looked up. For a moment, the music seemed to fade. His gaze met mine across the ballroom, and his smile faltered, just for a second, before returning with practiced ease. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced smoothly, stepping toward me, "I'd like you to meet my father, Leonard Dawson." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Camera flashes ignited. Claire's eyes widened in surprise, though her expression quickly softened into a poised smile. Monica's lips parted slightly, a flicker of unease passing behind her composed facade. Jason extended his hand, his grip firm and warm. "Dad," he said quietly, leaning closer. "I'm glad you came." So am I replied calmly. He guided me toward the center of the room, presenting me as an honored guest. Donors nodded with admiration, whispering about reconciliation and legacy. The narrative was unfolding exactly as planned, his plan. Then Jason lifted his glass and addressed the room. "Tonight is not only a celebration of my birthday," he said, his voice resonating through the hall, "but a celebration of family and the future of Bright Steps Foundation. My father has returned to us after many years, and I am honored to welcome him home." Applause filled the ballroom. I stood beside him, silent, observing. Noah slipped his hand into mine, smiling as if nothing in the world could ever be complicated. For a fleeting moment, I wished that were true. Jason lowered his voice and pressed a folder into my hands. "For the children," he whispered. "For Noah." Inside lay a pledge agreement, $5 million, prepared for my signature, complete with embossed seals and waiting witnesses. I looked at him, then at the cameras, then at the expectant faces surrounding us. Jason smiled, confident, certain, and utterly convinced of his victory. And as the applause faded, I realized why he had finally remembered he had a father. The applause from Jason's birthday celebration lingered in my ears long after the music faded. I left the country club quietly that night, the unsigned pledge agreement resting inside my leather case beside Noah's drawing and the framed lottery ticket. I did not return to my hotel immediately. Instead, I drove through the quiet streets of Detroit, watching the city lights blur against the windshield. Success has a way of illuminating everything, especially the things people try hardest to hide. The next morning, I met Arthur Bell. His office stood in an older brick building overlooking the Detroit River, a place untouched by vanity. Inside, the scent of polished wood and paper filled the air. Arthur greeted me with a firm handshake, his silver hair neatly combed, his expression as steady as I remembered. "Leo," he said, gesturing toward a leather chair, "I was wondering when you'd call." I placed the folder on his desk. "Tell me what you see." Arthur adjusted his glasses and opened the documents Jason had given me. The silence stretched as he reviewed the pages, his pen tapping lightly against the desk. Minutes passed before he finally spoke. "This is impressive," he said cautiously, "but impressions can be deceiving." He turned his computer screen toward me. Columns of numbers filled the display: donations, expenditures, administrative costs. At first glance, everything appeared legitimate. But Arthur's finger traced a line of figures highlighted in red. $2.3 million, he murmured. "Administrative expenses." I frowned. "That's high." "It's excessive," he replied, "especially for a non-profit of this size." He continued scrolling, revealing payments made to a media consulting firm, Horizon Image Group. The name felt familiar. "That company belongs to Claire," Arthur said quietly. A cold stillness settled between us. He opened another file. "And here, consulting fees paid to a private advisory service, registered under Monica Dawson." I leaned back slowly, absorbing the information. Outside the window, the Detroit River moved with quiet indifference, its surface reflecting the pale winter sky. "So, the foundation pays my daughter and my ex-wife," I said calmly. Arthur nodded. "Legally structured, but ethically questionable. And there's more." He printed a document and slid it across the desk. It was an internal email, mistakenly forwarded and later deleted, except it had been archived within the foundation's financial records. "Once your father wires the money, we'll restructure the board." The message was signed by Monica. Claire had replied with a single sentence, "Understood," The press will be ready. I stared at the paper for a long moment. My hands remained steady, but something deep within me tightened. Not with anger, but with clarity. They planned everything, I said softly. Arthur met my gaze. Leo, this isn't charity. It's a machine. The words lingered in the room like smoke. Later that afternoon, I visited Bright Steps Foundation unannounced. The building stood proudly in a renovated historic district, its glass facade reflecting the promise of compassion. Inside, children's artwork lined the walls, bright colors, uneven lines, and hopeful hearts. Noah sat at a small table, carefully coloring a picture of a house beneath a golden sun. When he saw me, his face lit up. "You came back," he said, beaming. "I promised I would," I replied, kneeling beside him. He handed me another drawing, two figures standing side by side, holding hands. "That's you and me," he said proudly. I smiled, though my chest tightened. "It's beautiful, Noah." Across the room, I noticed a teacher speaking quietly with another parent. Their voices were low, but urgent. "We're still waiting for the funding," the teacher said. "The foundation promised support months ago." The parent sighed. "We were told the check was on its way." I remained silent, listening. The room was filled with laughter and innocence, yet the promise of help seemed to exist only in words. When I left the building, the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the pavement. I held Noah's drawing carefully, the paper trembling slightly in the breeze. That evening, I returned to Arthur's office. "There's enough here to raise serious questions," he said, organizing the documents into a secure file. "But suspicion isn't proof. Not yet." I looked at the framed lottery ticket resting inside my case, its glass surface reflecting the dim light. "Then we find proof," I replied quietly. Arthur studied me for a moment. "Jason believes you're going to fund his foundation, doesn't he?" "Yes," I said. "He's certain." Arthur closed the file with deliberate care. "What will you do?" I paused, recalling Jason's confident smile, Monica's carefully measured words, and Claire's silent complicity. Then I thought of Noah, his innocent trust, his unguarded warmth. "I'll let them believe what they want," I said. Arthur nodded slowly, understanding at last. "You're not here to give them money." "No," I replied, my voice calm and unwavering. I closed the leather case and rose to leave. Outside, the city lights flickered on as dusk settled over Detroit. Somewhere in the distance, a siren echoed faintly, carried on the wind. As I stepped into the night, I realized the truth was no longer hidden in shadows. It was waiting, patiently, to be revealed. And the next time I stood beside my son, it would not be as a father seeking reconciliation, but as a witness prepared to expose everything. A week after my meeting with Arthur Bell, I returned to Detroit, not as a guest of honor, but as a quiet observer. The Bright Steps Foundation occupied a restored brick building on a quiet street, its glass doors etched with hopeful words, "Empowering children with Down syndrome." Morning sunlight spilled through the windows, illuminating the hallway where children's drawings hung like fragments of unfiltered truth. Inside, the air smelled faintly of crayons and freshly brewed coffee. Noah sat at a small table in the art room, his legs swinging gently as he concentrated on a sheet of paper. When he noticed me standing in the doorway, his face brightened with pure, uncomplicated joy. "Leo!" he called, his voice warm and eager. "You came back!" I smiled and walked toward him. "I told you I would." He held up a drawing, two figures beneath a wide blue sky, one tall, one small, their hands joined by a simple line. "That's us," he said proudly. "It's beautiful," I replied softly, kneeling beside him. "You're a very talented artist, Noah." His teacher, Mrs. Ellison, approached with a gentle smile. "He's been talking about you all week," she said quietly. "He doesn't forget kindness." Her words lingered in the room like sunlight. For a moment, the noise of the world faded, replaced by the soft scratch of crayons and the quiet laughter of children who asked for nothing but patience and understanding. I spent the morning there, listening, watching, learning. The children sang simple songs, their voices uneven but sincere. One boy tapped gently on a small keyboard, his melody hesitant yet hopeful. Another girl handed me a paper flower she had folded with careful determination. It was a place of sincerity, untouched by ambition, or so it seemed. During a brief break, I stepped into the hallway where Mrs. Ellison spoke in hushed tones with a parent. Their conversation carried just enough for me to hear. "We're still waiting for the funding," she said, her voice strained. "The foundation promised support for the art program months ago." The parent sighed. "We were told the check was already approved." I remained still, Noah's drawing folded carefully in my hands. The promise of generosity, it seemed, existed more in speeches than in action. Later that afternoon, Pastor Samuel Reed arrived to lead a small music session. He greeted me warmly, his presence calm and reassuring. "Mr. Dawson," he said, shaking my hand, "I've heard wonderful things about you." "Please call me Leo," I replied. As the children gathered around him, Pastor Reed lowered his voice. "We were promised assistance from Bright Steps," he said gently, "but the funds never reached us. We continue through donations from the community." His words confirmed what Arthur had already suspected. Not proof, but a pattern. When the session ended, Noah tugged at my sleeve. "Will you come to my birthday?" he asked, his voice soft but hopeful. I hesitated for a moment, caught between truth and tenderness. "Yes," I said quietly, "if you invite me." His smile widened, radiant and unguarded. "I will." Before leaving, I asked Pastor Reed to meet me privately. In the quiet of his office, sunlight filtered through stained glass windows, casting gentle colors across the wooden desk. "I'd like to help," I told him. Quietly, he regarded me with thoughtful eyes. "Are you certain?" I nodded. These children deserve more than promises. Within days, an anonymous donation established a small art program for children with Down syndrome. Supplies, instruments, and scholarships funded through a discreet trust. My name appeared nowhere on the documents. Only Noah knew. When he discovered the new easels and paints, he ran to me, his laughter echoing through the room. "Did you do this, Leo?" I smiled, but said nothing. Across the hall, I noticed Jason speaking with donors, his voice confident and assured. He gestured toward photographs and promotional banners, presenting a vision of generosity that shimmered beneath the lights. For a brief moment, our eyes met. He smiled, a calculated, knowing smile. Later that evening, as I prepared to leave, Noah pressed another drawing into my hands. This one showed a large sun rising above a Hualamal house, two figures standing together beneath its warmth. "Don't forget me," he whispered. "I won't," I promised. As I stepped outside, the cool Detroit air carried the distant sound of traffic. I placed the drawing carefully into my leather case beside the framed lottery ticket and Arthur's documents, innocence and truth resting side by side. Behind me, the glass doors of Bright Steps reflected the fading light, their polished surface concealing more than it revealed. And for the first time, I realized that Jason's foundation was built not only on ambition, but on something far more fragile than he was willing to admit. The illusion of wealth has a peculiar way of changing how people look at you. It softens their voices, straightens their posture, and fills their smiles with expectation. Jason believed I was no longer the man he once denied, and in many ways, he was right. A week after my visit to Bright Steps Foundation, I returned to Arthur Bell's office, overlooking the Detroit River. The sky outside was pale and overcast, the water moving slowly beneath a blanket of winter light. Inside, the room was warm, lined with shelves of financial ledgers and framed certificates earned over decades of quiet diligence. Arthur adjusted his glasses as he reviewed a thick stack of documents. "You've done well to keep everything private," he said, his tone measured. "Very few people could resist the temptation to announce a win like yours." "I had no reason to announce it," I replied calmly. "Not to them." He nodded, understanding more than I needed to explain. Arthur slid a leather folder across the desk. Inside were certified copies of legal documents, each page stamped, notarized, and sealed with the authority of Canadian law. I rested my hand lightly on the papers, feeling their weight as if they carried more than ink and signatures. "Is everything in place?" I asked. Arthur leaned back slightly. "Yes, 90% of your winnings have been transferred into an irrevocable charitable trust in Ontario. The funds are protected, untouchable, and beyond the reach of any individual, family included." I exhaled slowly. For the first time in years, I felt something resembling peace. "And the remaining 10%? I asked. "Secured in diversified accounts," Arthur replied. "Enough to provide you with comfort for the rest of your life. Nothing extravagant, just stability." I nodded. Stability had always been enough for me. Arthur studied my expression for a moment. "Jason believes he'll inherit your fortune, doesn't he?" "Yes," I said quietly. "He's certain of it." Arthur closed the folder with deliberate care. "Then he's building his future on an illusion." I allowed myself a faint smile. "Let him." And silence settled between us, broken only by the distant hum of traffic drifting through the window. Outside, the river continued its slow, patient journey, unchanged by the ambitions of men. Arthur hesitated before speaking again. "Leo, may I ask you something?" "Of course." "Why did you choose a charitable trust?" he asked gently. "You could have given everything directly to your family, or kept it entirely for yourself." I considered the question, my thoughts drifting back to a small art room filled with laughter and colored pencils. "I've seen what money does to people," I said at last. "But I've also seen what it can do for children who have nothing to gain from it, except opportunity." Arthur nodded, his eyes thoughtful. "Then your decision was wise." I reached into my leather case and removed the framed lottery ticket, placing it carefully on the desk beside Noah's drawing. The contrast was striking, one symbolizing fortune, the other innocence. "Jason believes this belongs to him," I said quietly. Arthur followed my gaze, but it never did. Later that evening, I received a call from Monica. Her voice was composed, though a faint tension lingered beneath her words. "Leo," she began, "Jason is hoping you'll attend the Foundation's upcoming board reception. It would mean a great deal to him, and to Noah." There it was again, Noah's name, spoken like a key meant to unlock my resolve. "I'll consider it," I replied evenly. A pause followed. "You've changed," she said softly. "No," I answered. "I've simply learned." When the call ended, I stood by the window, watching the city lights flicker on as dusk settled over Detroit. For years, my family had measured worth in numbers, income, status, influence. Now, they believed those numbers belonged to them. They believed reconciliation could be purchased and inheritance was inevitable. But they did not know the truth. They did not know that the fortune they sought had already been entrusted to something far greater than ambition, secured beyond their reach, protected by law, and destined for a purpose they could neither control nor claim. Arthur closed the final document and handed it to me. "It's done," he said. I slipped the papers into my case beside Noah's drawing and the framed ticket. Innocence, fortune, and the truth. 3 quiet witnesses to a story still unfolding. As I prepared to leave, Arthur spoke once more. "What will you tell Jason when he asks about the money?" I paused at the door, my hand resting on the handle. "Nothing," I said calmly. I stepped into the cold evening air, the city stretching before me in silence. Somewhere across town, my son was preparing his next move, confident, ambitious, and utterly convinced of his future. He believed he was waiting for an inheritance. But what he did not know was that there was nothing left for him to inherit. Detroit wore the color of early autumn when the next chapter of my life quietly began to unfold. The trees lining the streets near Bright Steps Foundation had turned a muted gold, their leaves drifting slowly to the pavement, like silent witnesses to time itself. I returned to the city not as a father seeking reconciliation, but as a man preparing for truth. Jason had invited me to attend a private reception with the Foundation's board of directors, a gathering meant to celebrate progress, gratitude, and the promise of a brighter future. The invitation arrived in a cream-colored envelope, embossed in gold, identical to the one he had sent for his birthday. A performance, carefully staged. Inside the ballroom of the Detroit Athletic Club, the atmosphere shimmered with elegance. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light across polished marble floors. Donors mingled with trustees, their voices low and confident, their laughter rehearsed. Claire moved gracefully among them, directing photographers with practiced ease, while Monica greeted guests with a poise that bordered on perfection. Jason stood at the center of it all, his presence commanding, his voice persuasive. When he noticed me entering, his smile widened, not with affection, but with certainty. "Dad," he said warmly, clasping my hand, "I knew you wouldn't miss this." "I wouldn't," I replied calmly. He guided me toward a table near the stage, where a sleek leather folder rested beside a crystal glass of champagne. The familiar weight of expectation hung in the air. "For the children," Jason murmured, leaning closer. "This pledge will change everything." I glanced at the document, another commitment, meticulously prepared, awaiting my signature. $5 million. Witnessed, notarized, and ready for public announcement. "Everything?" I asked quietly. He smiled. "For Bright Steps and for Noah." Across the room, Noah sat beside an easel, coloring with careful concentration. When he saw me, he waved enthusiastically, his innocence untouched by the ambitions surrounding him. I returned the gesture, my expression softening. Monica approached, her voice gentle but edged with urgency. "Leo," she said, lowering her tone, "Jason has worked tirelessly to build this foundation. Whatever happened in the past, we can move forward now. For Noah's sake." I studied her face, searching for sincerity beneath the practiced calm. "Is that what this is about?" I asked quietly. Her eyes faltered for a fraction of a second. "It's always been about him." Claire joined us moments later, her smile flawless as she adjusted the angle of a nearby camera. The press will be ready after the announcement, she said smoothly. It will be a beautiful story, family, redemption, and generosity. A beautiful story. I nodded politely, saying nothing. Later that evening, I stepped onto the terrace overlooking the Detroit River. The cool air carried the faint sound of traffic, distant and indifferent. Arthur Bell stood waiting beside the railing, his posture composed, his expression unreadable. "You're certain about this?" he asked quietly. "Yes," I replied. Arthur handed me a sealed envelope. Inside were updated financial reports, evidence of irregularities, misdirected funds, and inflated administrative costs. The pattern was unmistakable. "There's more," he added. "The Internal Revenue Service has begun reviewing BrightStep's filings. Detective Maria Quinn has expressed interest in the case." A small twist of fate, or perhaps the beginning of consequence. I slipped the envelope into my leather case beside Noah's drawings and the framed lottery ticket. Innocence, truth, and the illusion of wealth, resting side by side. "Jason believes you're about to secure his future," Arthur said. I looked back through the glass doors at my son, laughing with donors beneath the chandeliers. "Let him believe it," I replied calmly. When I returned inside, Jason raised his glass to address the room. His voice carried with confidence and conviction. "Tonight," he declared, "we celebrate not only the progress of BrightStep's Foundation, but the return of family. My father has come home, and with his support, our mission will reach new heights." Applause filled the hall. He extended his hand toward me, inviting me to join him on stage. In that moment, the cameras turned. The donors leaned forward. Monica's smile trembled with expectation, and Claire signaled the photographers to prepare. Jason's eyes met mine, certain, unwavering, and convinced of victory. "Tomorrow," he whispered softly, "everything will finally be ours." I returned his gaze with quiet composure, my voice steady and calm. "Tomorrow," I said, "everything will change." The morning of Jason's birthday arrived quietly, almost respectfully, as if the world itself had chosen to lower its voice before what was about to unfold. Detroit shimmered beneath a pale autumn sun. The air was crisp, touched by the faint scent of fallen leaves, and the streets moved with a steady rhythm that felt both familiar and distant. I stood by the window of my hotel room overlooking the river, adjusting the cuffs of my jacket with deliberate care. Inside my leather case rested 3 objects: Noah's drawing, the framed lottery ticket, and Arthur Bell's sealed documents. Innocence, fortune, truth. Each one waited patiently, like a silent witness to the moment that was coming. I met Arthur later that morning at his office. The room was quiet, illuminated by soft amber light reflecting off polished wood and neatly arranged ledgers. He greeted me with his usual composure, though his eyes carried a trace of concern. "Are you certain you want to proceed tonight?" he asked gently. "Yes," I replied. "It's time." Arthur handed me a final folder. "These are the updated audit reports. They confirm the irregularities, administrative expenses exceeding $2.3 million, media payments routed through Horizon Image Group, and consulting fees linked to Monica Dawson. The pattern is clear." "Is it enough?" I asked. "It's enough to raise serious questions," he said, "and enough to begin an investigation." A moment of silence passed between us. Outside the window, the Detroit River flowed steadily beneath a gray sky, indifferent to the ambitions of men. "There's one more thing," Arthur added quietly. "Detective Maria Quinn has reviewed the preliminary evidence. She will be present tonight, discreetly." I nodded slowly. Good. When I left his office, The weight of the leather case felt heavier than before, not with burden, but with certainty. That afternoon, I visited Bright Steps Foundation one last time before the celebration. The art room was filled with laughter. The children gathered around a table scattered with colored pencils and paper. Noah looked up as I entered, his face bright with recognition. "Leo!" he exclaimed, running toward me. "You came!" "I wouldn't miss seeing you," I said, kneeling beside him. He handed me another drawing, a house beneath a rising sun, two figures standing together, one tall, one small. "That's us again," he said proudly. "It's perfect," I replied softly. Pastor Samuel Reed approached, his expression warm yet thoughtful. "Your support has already made a difference," he said quietly. "The children are thriving." "I'm glad," I answered. "They deserve nothing less." As I prepared to leave, Noah tugged gently at my sleeve. "Will you come tonight?" he asked. I hesitated, then smiled. "Yes, Noah, I'll be there." His laughter echoed behind me as I stepped into the cool afternoon air, the drawing carefully placed inside my case beside the others. By evening, the country club stood illuminated beneath a canopy of golden lights. Black sedans lined the circular drive, and the sound of jazz drifted through the open doors. Inside, guests mingled with practiced elegance, their conversations woven with anticipation and admiration. Claire moved gracefully among the photographers, directing their lenses with quiet authority. Monica welcomed donors with a composed smile, her poise unshaken. And at the center of it all stood Jason Dawson, confident, assured, and certain that the night would mark the pinnacle of his success. When he saw me enter, his expression softened into a warm, calculated smile. "Dad," he said, clasping my hand, "I'm glad you're here. Tonight means everything." "I know," I replied calmly. He guided me toward the stage, where a polished podium awaited beneath the glow of crystal chandeliers. A leather folder rested upon it, the pledge agreement prepared for my signature, witnessed and ready for public announcement. "For Bright Steps," Jason whispered. "For Noah." Across the room, I noticed a woman standing quietly near the entrance, her gaze observant, her presence understated. Detective Maria Quinn inclined her head slightly in acknowledgement. The room filled with applause as Jason raised his glass. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, his voice resonant with pride, "tonight we celebrate family, generosity, and the future of Bright Steps Foundation. My father has returned to us, and with his support, our mission will reach new heights." Applause thundered through the ballroom. Cameras flashed. Donors leaned forward with anticipation. Jason extended his hand, inviting me to the stage. I stepped forward slowly, the leather case in my grasp, feeling the quiet weight of everything it contained. Noah's drawing, the framed ticket, the truth. As I reached the podium, Jason leaned closer, his voice barely above a whisper. "After tonight," he said softly, "everything will finally be ours." I looked at him, at the ambition in his eyes, the certainty in his smile, and answered with calm resolve. "No, Jason," I said quietly. He frowned, confusion flickering across his face. I opened the leather case and rested my hand upon the sealed documents. "After tonight," I continued, my voice steady beneath the glow of the chandeliers, "everything will belong to the truth." The ballroom fell silent as I stood behind the polished podium, the glow of crystal chandeliers reflecting against the glass frame of the lottery ticket resting before me. Hundreds of eyes watched, donors, journalists, board members, and the family I once called my own. Jason remained beside me, confident and composed. His hand hovered near the pledge agreement, certain that within moments his future would be sealed with my signature. "Ladies and gentlemen," I began, my voice calm and steady, "thank you for welcoming me tonight." The cameras adjusted. A soft murmur drifted through the crowd, then faded into attentive silence. "I spent most of my life working in a steel plant in Ontario," I continued. "It was not a glamorous life, but it was honest. I believed in providing for my family, even when it meant standing quietly in the background." I paused, allowing the words to settle. 10 years ago, my son told me he did not have a poor father. That night, I walked away without anger and without a voice. Jason's smile tightened, but he remained still. I gently placed the framed lottery ticket upon the podium. "Years later, fate handed me this," I said softly. 18.4 million Canadian dollars. Gasps rippled through the ballroom. Camera flashes ignited like distant lightning. For many, wealth is an opportunity. For others, it becomes a temptation. I turned my gaze toward Jason, then toward Monica and Claire. Their composure wavered beneath the sudden weight of uncertainty. "Jason invited me here tonight to support Bright Steps Foundation, a noble cause dedicated to children with Down syndrome. And I believed in that cause. I still do." A hush fell over the room. "But generosity," I continued, "must be guided by truth." I opened my leather case and withdrew the documents Arthur Bell had prepared. The sound of paper unfolding echoed through the hall with quiet authority. "These are certified audit reports," I said, my voice unwavering. "They reveal administrative expenses exceeding $2.3 million. Media contracts awarded to Horizon Image Group, and consulting fees linked to Monica Dawson." A ripple of shock spread through the audience. Claire's face paled. Monica's hand trembled slightly as she clutched her glass. Jason's confident expression faltered for the first time. "This is not an accusation," I said gently. "It is evidence. Evidence that deserves transparency and accountability." The doors at the rear of the ballroom opened. Detective Maria Quinn stepped inside, her presence calm and deliberate. She inclined her head politely before approaching the stage, accompanied by 2 federal investigators. A wave of whispers swept across the room. Jason's voice broke the silence. "Dad, what are you doing?" I met his gaze, my expression neither harsh nor triumphant. "I am telling the truth," I replied quietly. He stared at me, disbelief flickering in his eyes. "You're destroying everything I built." "No," I said softly. "I'm giving it a chance to stand on honesty." The room remained suspended in stillness as Detective Quinn addressed the board of directors, her tone measured and professional. "We are here to review financial records associated with Bright Steps Foundation," she announced. "We request your full cooperation." Several donors rose from their seats, murmuring in concern. A few quietly withdrew, their expressions guarded. Camera flashes captured every moment, broadcasting the unfolding reality beyond the ballroom walls. Jason's shoulders stiffened, his confidence unraveling beneath the weight of public scrutiny. Monica's composure faltered, and Claire lowered her gaze, the facade of certainty slipping away. I reached into my case once more and removed Noah's drawing, placing it gently beside the framed ticket. "This," I said softly, "is why I came." The image of a small house beneath a bright sun rested between us, a symbol of innocence untouched by ambition. "I have already established an independent charitable trust dedicated to the education and artistic development of children with Down syndrome," I continued. "It will bear Noah's name." A murmur of admiration replaced the earlier shock. Jason looked at the drawing, his voice unsteady. You gave the money away?" I gave it purpose, I answered calmly. The silence that followed was heavier than any applause. As Detective Quinn spoke quietly with the board, I stepped away from the podium. The lights of the ballroom shimmered around me, reflecting against glass and crystal, as though the room itself had paused to absorb the truth. Jason's voice stopped me before I reached the stairs. "Dad," he said, his tone strained. "Was this revenge?" I turned slightly, meeting his eyes for the first time that night, not with anger, but with clarity. "No, Jason," I replied quietly. "This was a choice." His expression faltered, uncertainty replacing certainty as the weight of consequence settled around him. And as I walked toward the exit beneath the fading glow of the chandeliers, the silence behind me deepened, leaving one question suspended in the air, unanswered and unforgettable. The investigation unfolded quietly in the weeks that followed. Bright Steps Foundation did not collapse overnight. There were no dramatic arrests, no flashing sirens beneath the chandeliers of the country club. Instead, there were letters, formal, precise, and unavoidable. Donors withdrew their support. Auditors requested documents. The board of directors convened behind closed doors, their voices measured and uncertain. Reputation, I learned, rarely shatters with a single blow. It erodes, slowly, beneath the weight of truth. Jason's name disappeared from headlines that once praised him. Claire resigned from Horizon Image Group, her public statements brief and carefully worded. Monica retreated into silence, her composure replaced by a quiet fatigue that no longer sought justification. No one called me, and I did not call them. Instead, I returned to the places where promises had never been broken. The small art room at the Bright Steps Satellite Center remained filled with laughter, its walls adorned with the bright, uneven drawings of children, who asked nothing of the world except patience and kindness. Noah was there when I arrived. He looked up from his easel, his face lighting with the same warmth he had shown me from the very beginning. Without hesitation, he ran toward me, holding a new drawing in his hands. "This is for you," he said proudly. I knelt beside him, accepting the paper with gentle care. It showed two figures beneath a wide golden sun, one tall, one small, standing together before a simple house. The lines were imperfect, the colors uneven, yet the meaning was unmistakable. "It's beautiful," I whispered. He smiled. "You're my friend." For a moment, the world felt quiet again. Pastor Samuel Reed approached, his expression calm and sincere. "The Noah Educational Trust has already begun its work," he said softly. "Scholarships, art programs, and music classes are being established across the city. You've given these children something lasting, Leo." I shook my head gently. "I only gave them a chance. The rest belongs to them." As we spoke, I noticed a familiar figure standing at the doorway. Jason. He did not enter the room. He stood in silence, his hands folded, his gaze fixed upon Noah and me. There was no anger in his eyes, only uncertainty and something deeper that neither of us dared to name. He hesitated, as though searching for words that would not come. "Dad," he said quietly. I did not turn around. Not out of cruelty, but out of understanding. Some questions cannot be answered by words, and some lessons must be learned in silence. After a long moment, his footsteps faded down the corridor. I remained where I was, holding Noah's drawing beneath the gentle light of the afternoon sun. Outside, autumn leaves drifted across the pavement, their quiet descent marking the passage of time more honestly than any clock. I thought of the steel plant in Ontario, of long shifts and colder winters, of a life built not on wealth, but on endurance. Money had changed my circumstances, but it had not changed who I was. It had only revealed who others chose to become. Revenge, I realized, is rarely about punishment. Sometimes it is simply the act of telling the truth and allowing it to stand on its own. I never learned how the investigation into Bright Steps would ultimately conclude. Perhaps Jason would rebuild his life with humility. Perhaps he would not. The outcome no longer belonged to me. What mattered was Noah's laughter echoing through the art room, and the quiet certainty that compassion, once given freely, leaves no room for regret. As I left the building that afternoon, I folded Noah's drawing carefully and placed it beside the framed lottery ticket inside my leather case. Innocence resting beside fortune, both tempered by time. Some stories end with victory. Others end with understanding. Ham ended with a choice and a silence that spoke louder than words. Thank you for listening and sharing this moment with me today. Please let me know in the comments where you are watching from and what time it is where you are. This story contains fictional elements woven in for entertainment, education, and reflection. If this story moved you, even a little, another story is waiting for you on your screen. YouTube believes you will enjoy it, so please sit back and enjoy.